Cold War rivalry between the United States and Russia. Joining me now, Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. He's a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. We had originally invited him on to talk a little Wisconsin politics, but clearly what's going on the world stage and the senator's presence in the Foreign Relations Committee. I wanted to start here. Senator, good morning to you.
Good morning, Chuck.
I want to talk with let's start with Russia. The United States accusing Russia of violating a treaty. This is on top of course, of what the Russians have done when it comes to Edward Snowden, what they've been doing in Ukraine. Now the Europeans seem to be finally catching up to the United States on sanctions. Where are you? Are you satisfied with the European response now? What more do you want out of the president? Or are we at a point now, let's see how these sanctions work?
Well, certainly we should have been really talking about Russia's violation of the INF treaty years ago. We knew about it. We should have been calling Russia on that, but President Obama wanted to reset relationships, so they wanted to just sweep that under the rug. I guess increased sanctions might be a good thing. They're also a double-edged sword. They're going to give Vladimir Putin an excuse with his population. Because of his propaganda, he's widely popular in Russia. They'll just feed into that propaganda machine. So that's a real double-edged sword. I think it's appropriate. We should do them. But what we really need to do is we really need to match military strength to military strength. Now, I'm not talking about combat troops on the ground, but we should be very visibly and overtly re-equipping the Ukrainian army. We should be showing our full support for Poroshenko's efforts to secure his border, to secure eastern Ukraine, because we have to recognize the reality that Vladimir Putin is a megalomaniac. This is all about power for him. He doesn't care about the Russian economy. He really doesn't. He only cares about his own personal power, and the only way we're going to deter him from further aggressive action, he's not looking for off-ramps. He's looking for on-ramps. We have to deny him those on-ramps.
So if you're taking your advice, if you escalate the amount of military equipment we send over to Ukraine, doesn't that just inevitably escalate the violence and escalate what is a quasi-civil war now into a full-fledged civil war?
Chuck, you're using the wrong term. It's called deter. You actually do achieve peace through strength. Vladimir Putin right now is not deterred. He's going to continue onward unless he actually realizes somebody might stand up to him. Now, Poroshenko and the Ukrainians are standing up to him, but they need help. We also need to show, NATO has to strengthen its resolves. We should be putting more troops in places like Poland. We should certainly be doing everything we can to support the Baltic states. I mean, as long as Vladimir Putin thinks he can continue to move aggressively and destabilize those democracies that ring Russia, he's going to continue to act aggressively. He won't be deterred. We have to change his calculus, and we're not doing that right now. You
brought up NATO. Ultimately, I mean, you want to see, there's been some talk of some NATO military exercises taking place in Poland. Some of it is a symbolic deal, but at the same time to send a message to Putin. I mean, do you think that NATO should be the force that essentially helps reinforce Ukraine? Ukraine's not a NATO member nation, but do you want to see NATO as the front group here and not just the United States acting unilaterally?
Yeah, Europe has been asleep. They've all ramped down their defense spending, most of them below 2%. They're not even meeting their NATO commitment. That sends a pretty powerful signal to Vladimir Putin, who, by the way, Russia's only about a $2 trillion a year economy. You combine Europe and America, we're over 30 trillion. I mean, we are massively larger. We're far more powerful, but Vladimir Putin isn't seeing that power. He's not, there is no deterrence. And that's what we need to do. The other thing we have to engage in, Chuck, is a far more robust information war. Vladimir Putin in Russia is winning the propaganda war.
How do you do that?
It's unbelievable.
You're absolutely right that he is, and there's no doubt. And I heard you say this earlier, and you're saying how, in many ways, he'll spin these sanctions as, hey, they're afraid of Russia, and it'll be some sort of self-aggrandizing moment for Putin. But how do you fight this? He's clearly, I mean, it's not as if the U.S. is going to start doing TV signals into Russia again?
Chuck, we should. We need to start doing that, because what Vladimir Putin, what is being broadcast on Channel 1, Wall Street Journal ran an article, basically interviewed a woman, this is all fiction, a woman that supposedly witnessed the Ukrainian soldiers crucifying a 3-year-old. Totally false, but that's the propaganda that Russia is feeding its citizens, which, again, so Vladimir Putin is out there fighting against that barbarity. The Russians are buying it, and it strengthens his hands. We have to combat that horrible propaganda.
All right, I want to ask you about essentially the diplomatic conflict right now between the Obama administration and the Netanyahu administration. this being public is no good for anybody.
No.
And regardless of where you stand here, this, the critique of Secretary Kerry by many on this and how this was handled, but the Israelis going public. At this point, how much patience should the U.S. have if the Israeli government is going to essentially humiliate our Secretary of State on the world stage?
Well, first of all, America's got to be pretty careful at trying to put forward agreements that really show moral equivalency. There is no moral equivalency. What America should be talking about is we should be speaking with moral clarity. This wouldn't be happening were it not for Hamas firing rockets into Israel. This wouldn't be happening if Hamas hadn't built terror tunnels into Israel to create terror, to kidnap Israelis and to murder them. You know, it had the Palestinians taken Gaza, started cooperating with Israel, started working toward the betterment of their people, this wouldn't be happening. So there's no moral equivalency here. You know, as Netanyahu says all the time, Israel has missiles to protect its people. Hamas uses its people to protect missiles. I think that's a very good statement that shows there is no moral equivalency here. We ought to be speaking with moral clarity. There's one person, there's one party that is the problem here, and is Hamas and their terror, not Israel.
Now, the U.S. has stood by Netanyahu on this war essentially for the first couple of weeks, and now feels it's time to pull back. Do you believe it is time to pull back?
Israel has to defeat Hamas. I mean,
period. And what does defeat look like?
Because
total demilitarization?
Otherwise, Chuck, otherwise we'll be back here 2 or 3 or 4 years. I mean, again, I just entered public life 3 years ago. I've been watching the Palestinian problem boil for decades.
Sure.
And it's not going away till one side is defeated or one side actually admits Israel's right to exist and starts working cooperatively. This could all end if the Palestinians, if Hamas would stop its terror ways, if they would stop sending rockets, if they'd actually work with Israel to build their economies for the betterment of their people. This doesn't have to happen, but as long as Hamas is there and firing rockets, this is going to continue. So my guess is Israel should defeat Hamas.
And you're not a fan of these temporary ceasefires if it keeps Hamas in power in Gaza.
It's just going to keep the conflict boiling for further decades. At some point in time, you know, an evil party has got to be defeated, and we're going to recognize that here in America with the war on terror too. We just can't put our head in the sand. There are evil people in this world bent on terrorism. I can't think of anything more evil. That has to be defeated.
Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin. Again, we invited him on for our Wisconsin week. Have a lot of foreign relations news. You've got your own Foreign Relations Committee meeting today on Iran. We'll be watching that. Thank you, sir.
Have a good day.